Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Concise Conversations with Kathy and Jackie. So glad you're here with us today. To introduce our guest very quickly, it is Mr. Bryan Goodwin, Chief Executive Officer of McCrell International and the author of many books. So with that all said, as always, I'm going to step into the background and kick it over to Kathy.
Thank you, Dakota. We are just thrilled that Bryan Goodwin has joined us today, and Jackie and I are looking forward to having a conversation, a powerful conversation with him. Just a reminder that Concise Conversations is a way to bring information and good cheer to our network members, and we welcome everyone on Facebook. So, Bryan, we can't tell you how delighted we are to have you join us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, I know that Jackie and you have been longtime professional friends, and I know that she is looking forward to beginning by asking the first question.
I am indeed. And Bryan, it's great to have you. I think we can say back in Alabama, albeit virtually. And I know you have a great following and readership here. So as we begin, I was thinking about the various pathways your work has taken, and many of our listeners will know you from your work in balanced leadership, which certainly has been a powerful framework for leaders. But over the last, 4 to 5 years, if my memory serves me correct, you've kind of turned the focus to be a dual one now with looking at curiosity and its potential for students in classrooms and in schools. So I guess I'd like to ask you to lead off by sharing with us something about how you see leadership and curiosity intersecting, and maybe just what leaders can do to kind of inspire teachers and students to open up their curiosity to better learn.
Sure. Yeah. We've obviously been doing a lot of work around instruction and leadership. And I think for us, this idea of curiosity is one of those moments when you're like, oh, now it's all coming together. It's all starting to make sense about what we're trying to accomplish as educators. And I kind of go back to my own classroom experiences as a teacher, wanting to be, Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society, wanting my kids to be standing on their chairs, Captain, my captain, never quite getting there and wondering what was missing, feeling like something was off about the system because I wanted my kids to love learning. And so when we encountered this curiosity work in Australia, it made so much sense to us because it spoke to what needs to happen in a classroom, but also what leaders need to be doing. How do we create schools where kids can be curious? And actually then you realize, well, kids can't be curious until teachers are curious. And so so many of the things that we were already writing about and talking about in terms of leadership, because we never believed that leadership should only be top down, right? It should be bottom up. It should be inside out. Maybe the powerful phrase I've heard recently that I keep repeating is this idea that having power over people only holds them down. You want to have power under people, lifting them up. And I think that's one of these ways that a lot of ways for us, curiosity has been like that pebble in the still pond with all these ripple effects, making us see everything else that we've been doing and the same research base, but through a different lens about how do we get our students to be passionate learners and to be intrinsically motivated in what they're doing?
Bryan, I love that power underneath them, lifting them up. And now more than ever, both leaders and teachers need to think differently about how to tap into that curiosity in this time of virtual learning. What are you learning about connecting with students now that most everyone's teaching remotely?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So one of the things we also talk to leaders about, if you think about what we're doing right now, it's Heifetz and Laurie would call this an adaptive challenge, right? There's not a playbook anyone can possibly produce because none of us have ever done this before. So as leaders, we need to have really good questions, right? Same thing we want our teachers to have are really good questions. And I think the questions that our leaders need to be asking right now are really important. So for example, if the only question that we're asking is how do we go online, we've missed something, right? We've missed a more powerful question would be, how do we help students learn at home? And then you start wondering about, well, how do we make sure that they are self-directed as learners? How would you make sure that they're engaged in what they're doing? And so I think this idea of maybe it's asking also a question about how can we help our kids be curious as learners, whether they're in the classroom or at home, that's going to be the motivator. And we've seen a lot of drop off, as we know, in the last few months with participation in online learning. Some of that is technology, but I think a lot of it is the kids have no reason to show up, right? If we haven't made the learning interesting for them, why would they show up? So I think this could be really powerful to help teachers think about, all right, so if I'm going to get my kids curious, it's not just going to be all online, but how can I get them to read a book and to explore it more deeply? How can I get them to investigate something and write a report on that? And all of that really reflects what we were seeing happening in these Australian schools, right? That there was an emphasis, sure, on the building blocks of basic knowledge of reading and math, but then spending a lot of time helping kids become more invested in their learning through investigations and inquiry-based learning.
So, Bryan, I'm wondering if you would have just a few nuggets that you could offer to teachers and leaders who really want to commit to infuse curiosity in the work. What would those pebbles be that might, whether you're online, well, and let's stick with online. What might be some specific things that teachers could do to really build in opportunities for curiosity during the at-home learning, at home, not online.
At-home learning, yeah. So I think, and Jackie, this will be up your alley, it's really thinking about the questions that we're asking and framing learning around good questions. So going deeper into the learning through questions, but also maybe framing your entire unit as a question. Harvey Silver, you may know him, Jackie, he's my friend and colleague. He talks about maybe framing units as a study in, right? So we were talking before this call about Romeo and Juliet. So what if you framed Romeo and Juliet as an exploration or a study in things like maybe fate control, right? So instead, there's this whole idea of star-crossed lovers. Well, is that true? Are we really victims of fate, or do we have the ability to chart our own course in life? And so I think that could be something where now then kids could be reading Romeo and Juliet, but then also exploring some other things. Maybe I want to help them understand this idea of fate control or internal locus of control and provide more robust, rich explorations, which is, again, what we were seeing happening in Australia, where teachers come together to design these investigations and they're cross-curricular. And so I think it's imagining what the learning moment for our kids. It's sometimes with me as a teacher, but it could also be I've planted enough questions for kids as they read science or social studies or literature, or even solve math problems. Like, how could you take this math problem and now actually answer a question like, how tall should a ladder be if I'm trying to reach a 2-story window, right? Those kinds of things. Did that answer your question, Jackie?
I love the response because, Bryan, I've come to think in my work with teachers, helping them develop more effective questions, that there are two important ingredients. One is creating a question that kids will care about. Mm-hmm. And I say that they care about personally or that they're curious about, because if you don't connect your questions to the students, many will just tune out to the question. So I think questions are a way of engaging. And then the other piece is just that wording. And I love frame a study of, and just think about how exciting a teenager might be to pursue star-crossed lovers as opposed to the title of a play. So yes, I love those good nuggets. And
so listening to that dialogue between you and Jackie, Bryan, really made me think about not only hooking the kids, but thinking about educating the whole child, not just always focusing on academics. Is there a link between social and emotional learning and curiosity?
Yeah, and in fact, in the new book, where I got it right here, as it turns out, Building a Curious School, what you find in the research is that a couple of things. First of all, people who are happier tend to be more curious as well, right? There's a correlation between that. We also find that people who are more curious have better relationships with people. They have deeper relationships. And I think it's because you ask questions of other people, right? You're actually curious about other people, and you want to take their perspective, and you want to appreciate where they're coming from and understand them. So you think about right now in the context of the conversations that we're engaged in as a country, We need all people being curious about one another, about taking perspectives of, and especially of people of color that have felt too long they've been ignored. No one has really thought about their perspectives. I think that could be really powerful in the fall. So the other piece around social emotional learning too that I explore in the book is also around mental health. So studies have also found this, that most of us at some point in our life are going to go through some kind of emotional crisis, right? We're going to have a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis, or maybe it's a three-quarter life crisis as we retire. Now what do I do? What they find are that curious people navigate those crises better. And there's probably a variety of reasons for that. One is that, they actually pick up self-help books, right? And learn about what's going on in their lives, or they develop a new interest, a new hobby, or they say, I'm going to actually have a different capstone career. I'm going to make a change in my life to be happy. The other thing that I read about in the book quite a bit too is this idea of having curiosity about your own thoughts and your own emotions, which is really powerful. There's something called cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, that has been found to actually have sometimes as positive effects on students' well-being as medication. So, and really it's just the idea of like looking at your thoughts and realizing maybe they're exaggerated, maybe they're distorted. So maybe I'm catastrophizing, for example, right? I've said, I've got a C- on my last test. I'll never amount to anything in life. I'll be living in a van down by the river. That leads you into depression, right? So if we can take that thought and say, well, is that really true? Maybe I can re-examine that. So I think by helping kids become curious about their own thinking patterns, there are some examples in the book about how powerful that can be. And then this other piece about learning to connect better with other people. A lot of our happiness, you all know this, is grounded in personal connections, helping other people, and also having people in my life that I feel connected with. And so I think that can be a really powerful thing. There's so many spin-off benefits of curiosity. I think that's also why it's one idea, but there's so many things that fall in its orbit, which is why we have found that we can spend a lot of time helping schools emphasize curiosity. Because I can't think of anything better to give our kids than curiosity.
And Bryan, to bring it back to the school level, Kathy posed the question about social emotional learning, and we think of our students, but I think we've also been thinking about social emotional health and well-being for teachers during this time of really crisis, that I'm moving quickly from having basically a role to do what I was trained to do into this scary new environment. And I think our teachers have done fabulously well. Yeah. But I want to ask this, what would be the real benefits to a school, and what might leaders do to create that school culture that unleashes everyone's curiosity? What could they do, and what would the benefits be of a school where teachers have that?
Yeah, I'll start with the benefits. So, I think what you will have is more joyful learning. I was sharing with you also right before we came on, the things I've seen in places like Australia where they've really embraced curiosity. Usually it's afternoon investigations where the kids get to be curious. And I've seen the kids coming in from lunch excited to learn, right? Now the learning happens. And so learning will be more joyful for kids, but also for teachers. So I think that's a big benefit. And you can start to change the school culture also it's thinking about, as a leader, how do I replicate the conditions for my teachers that I want them creating in classrooms? So instead of doing the usual professional learning, come on down to the gym and learn this thing and implement it next week, frame it as an investigation. You could start the question like, how would we create more curious learners? What can we do in the short term? We also talk about building on your bright spots, because the reality is, like Jackie mentioned, teachers have been doing some amazing things. So where are kids already engaged? What's working for them? What was working for them before the break, before we had to leave school because of coronavirus? What activities, what lessons, what classes were making kids engaged? Can we build on those bright spots and do more of that? It's a way more affirming way to go about professional learning than sort of wagging your finger and saying you're all doing it wrong. Because the reality is there are so many things that are going right in our schools. Let's build on those things too. So that's an important thing for leaders to think about. How do I build on what my teachers are already bringing to me?
I love that, Bryan. Love that.
Bryan, one of the frustrating things about this is we could talk for another 30, 40 minutes, and I so appreciate the time. I think a theme that I heard threaded through this is curiosity, both by students and by teachers, can be the avenue to self-directed learning and life, where we'll remain curious all of our lives. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for what you do for us in Alabama and for the Alabama Best Practices Center. We appreciate your partnership. So Dakota, what's on the slate for next time?
Thank you all for having that conversation. I was very interested the entire time, and that one covered some ground for sure. So next week, we have Mr. Revis Gertman, the Director of Elementary Curriculum and Instruction out in Phoenix City. We are so excited to have him here next week. So same time, same place, Friday at 1 o'clock Central Time. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please email me at dakota@aplusala.org, or if you'd like to be a guest, email that same email. So we all hope you have a very good weekend, and we will see you next week.
Thanks again, Bryan. We really appreciate you being our guest.
Thank you. Stay curious, everybody.
Absolutely. Happy Friday.